Hello and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. And today again you have me, Ben Rose, as your co-host, but this time joined by Cordy Bartlett, the master marketeer of Supercede and the creator of the Reinsurance Podcast. Welcome to the show, Cordy.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's very good to be here. It's strange being on this side of the microphone.
Indeed, but we've got you here for a reason, because we want you to tell us all about what it's like producing the Reinsurance Podcast today, instead of having you in your normal place of hiding behind the camera, waving at us and telling us to stop recording because we've gone on far too long. But we did really want to hear, actually, a lot of people listen to the podcast, which is great, but you can't see, who else is listening to the podcast and what kind of response it's getting. But Cordy, you have our engagement stats and all this sort of thing. So since we launched, some 30 episodes or so ago, and back in Jan or Feb or something of 2022.
Yep.
Is anybody out there? Are they listening to us?
We're speaking into the ether. No one's listening at all. No, I'm joking. I have been massively surprised at the reaction that we've had from starting the podcast. I didn't think that a podcast about reinsurance would become as popular as it has become. When we first started, the reason that we started the podcast actually was when I first met Ben and Jerad. It's very clear that they are freakishly smart, and they've both decided to pump that brain power into reinsurance. And my job, coming on as marketer, is to have a look at what the company's assets are and how we can best utilize those for the benefit of the company. And all of that reinsurance knowledge is locked away in yours and Jerad's head, which is of no use to me or anyone else. So let's start a podcast. Let's have that stream of information come out for anyone if they want it, and it seems people want it.
What does it look like in terms of numbers? Are we talking tens of people, hundreds of people? Who listens to reinsurance is quite a niche industry.
It is indeed. It's more tens of thousands of people.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're averaging about 1,200 listeners a month now. We've got podcast episodes on a range of different topics within reinsurance. We've got some amazing guests. We've had the likes of people like Vicky Carter. We've recently had Jacob Palmer from BCG. That was a really good episode. And the episodes with just you and Jerad doing your analogy battles and informing the world of why reinsurance is an important topic and how it helps the world. It's been a good journey so far. Now we've got some really good guests lined up, which I'm very excited about over the coming month.
Indeed, and I think obviously you were flattering us quite a lot with our reinsurance knowledge.
I'll get whipped otherwise.
So. I'm sure. But in terms of actually thinking about how to take our listeners on the journey of reinsurance with us, we have guests because it's impossible in reinsurance to be an expert on everything. We try to keep our eyes and ears open to all the different nuances that can be explored, but obviously we are limited and only human in terms of what we can talk about. But I love some of the things that you introduced as games and little contests and things. Where did the ideas for some of these emerge, and what's your favorite kind of games that have come out of the podcast?
All right, so all cards on the table. I didn't know how good the podcast was going to be when we first started. So I thought, okay, we're going to have to introduce something to keep people engaged. And what better way to do that than games? We have a couple. So we've got Analogy Battle. That's a fan favorite. That's probably my favorite as well. Recently, you actually gave the best analogy that I think we've had so far, which was how reinsurance works for cedants, and you compared that to picking out random bits of fruit and veg. Very good. I'm going to link that in the show notes of this episode so you can listen to it, because it was very, very masterfully done.
Can that be the decider in the analogy battles? Because Jerad keeps winning and like winner takes all on that.
The difference between you isn't actually that great. I've got the numbers at home.
Yeah,
I'm not going to reveal them because we'll do a big reveal at some point.
Okay.
Or we could start a league. League could be fun.
Yeah. Also good. And how about some of the other games? Because I know we've had some funny ones.
So analogy battle, we've got price it, which is where we give you any random risk which you have to price using your expertise as an underwriter. We tried broke it, but that didn't work quite well.
Trying to communicate how you do entirely truthfully and not stretching any.
Yeah. What other games do we have? Price it, broke it, analogy battle.
We had Frisk Risk was one of the
Frisk
others.
Risk.
Yeah,
Frisk Risk was very good. Yeah. And Risk of the Week.
Oh yeah,
as well.
How does Frisk Risk work for people who haven't heard that one?
You're the expert at Frisk Risk, so I'll let you explain.
And I have to give credit here again to the inventors of Frisk Risk, which were a young lady called Stephanie and her partner Callum, who are known to me personally and have no reinsurance background at all, but really liked the word and thought it would be funny, and so created a game for us around it when we said we were starting a podcast. So I think, was that episode 1 or 2 or something?
It's very early on.
First tried this out, and it was actually really fun. So we carried it on. But the basic concept is that we take a description of a risk, so usually an insured risk, and we ask whether that's actually a real risk or whether it's something that one of us has just made up entirely. So the risk of us, for example, losing all of our podcast recordings accidentally after a day's work, is that an insurable risk or not? I don't know. Usually we do some research beforehand to find out.
I feel like for going forward, you need to be more... you need to have more of a clear difference between the risks that's real and the one that's not. Because I think one time you asked Jerad a Frisk risk about 300 Ferraris in the mountains, and then it turned out to be, I don't know, 300 Lamborghinis or something. It was such a minute detail that it's
minute. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry, Lamborghini owners.
If only. No, brilliant. And I think those games really help to give people a way through, as do the guests, in terms of bringing things together. I think it would be really nice to know what comes next for the podcast. So we've mostly recorded in London. We played our games. We've done a lot on what is reinsurance and so on. Where do you see the program taking us now armed with tens of thousands of plays and listens?
The podcast that's regularly in the top X amount of number of business podcasts in Bermuda. Mm-hmm. I think it's top 100.
Yeah.
I don't even know if Bermuda has 100 business podcasts, but it's nice to be there.
Absolutely.
What's next for the podcast? Well, we're going to continue having different guests on that are experts within their certain niche within reinsurance, which is a niche in and of itself. Fun-wise, I do like the idea of having some kind of ongoing competition between you and Jerad. I've got a few ideas in mind. I'm not going to release them yet.
All right, that sounds fun.
They still need to be worked out. Based on our viewership, the numbers and the demographics of the people that are listening to the podcast, it's quite interesting because we have people that are new to reinsurance that are just trying to learn about the industry. I'm guessing that they've probably been in the industry for a couple of years and they're just trying to get to grips with how everything works. And then we also have, at the other end, experts who listen to similar episodes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just to check we're saying the right things.
Yeah. And we get all this information directly from Spotify. We can see exactly who's listening. Well, not exactly, but general idea. We can see profession, title, assuming that they've clicked in from certain locations, and mediums. But yeah, the future of the podcast, we started this to be quite a fluid moving thing just to see how people would respond, and we're going to adapt accordingly. Yeah, we've got some good things planned.
All right, no spoilers.
Yeah,
it sounds like lots of things on the way.
Yeah, I feel like I need to give something away to tease them.
I won't. Keep them with bated breath as they wait to see what happens in future episodes.
Yeah. Anyway, how have you found the podcast so far? Because I feel like it didn't require that much convincing to you and Jerad.
Well, everybody wants to be, out there on a stage. somewhere. No, for me, I think the first couple of episodes, I really enjoyed the actual experience of being able to think aloud and talk aloud, on the podcast about reinsurance. Is such a fabulous topic to go off on all sorts of, journeys into the depths of what can happen in reinsurance deal making. But at the same time, I was also a bit nervous and worried afterwards when I realized quite how much we were disclosing about ourselves to an unknowable global audience of listeners. So now, presumably, a lot of people listening to this episode as well know me a lot better than I know them. But I think after the first few episodes and after speaking to a few of our listeners, I got used to that fairly quickly.
Yeah. Well, you've become famous now within reinsurance. Don't you have people coming up to you at conferences and events saying, "Hey, I know you from a podcast, don't I? Are you the Ben Rose?"
Yeah. In Monte Carlo this year and in Baden-Baden this year, we had people coming up and being like, "Oh, you don't know me, but I'm your biggest fan. I listened to all the episodes of the Reinsurance Podcast."
Did you sign autographs?
Not at the autograph stage yet. As much as people want people to sign things in our industry,
I think you should just do it anyway. You will have my autograph.
Yeah, but no, but it's an immense privilege to be able to. Now, especially now that we have the traction that we do in the market, it means increasingly we get to speak to an ever more exciting pipeline of brilliant guests. Often the C-suite of major companies in our industry, often people who are doing super interesting things that they want to share with the market. So we take it very seriously as well now as very helpful and transparent and useful kind of custodians of that role, meaning we have to keep it slightly separate from our day jobs and so on to make sure that we're providing all of our listeners and our guests with a really interesting and varied set of perspectives on our industry. So that's a really exciting task to be given, and one that we really look forward to continuing, I think.
Speaking of guests, if you had to, let's say, send the people, if no one has listened to this podcast before and this is the first episode, which 3 episodes would you want them to go back and listen to? What are your 3 favorite episodes?
I'm too much of a nerd. That's the thing.
It's fine,
especially when it comes to the reinsurance side. So I really enjoyed the corporate strategy episode with Harold Buchanan because it just changes the way you think about reinsurance and insurance companies and what strategy means. I think it's very easy to think about it at too shallow a kind of surface level. We've had other speakers that have added testament to that as well, but beyond that, there have been some really, really fascinating ones down particular niches. So the space episode with Dr. Shima Adi, that was just incredible.
That was my favorite episode.
Yeah, quiz a space expert on how you insure rockets and satellite launches and all this sort of thing. That was truly fabulous. So give that one a listen. But then actually, and I think particularly some of the early episodes where we were still trying to figure it out, the episodes with just Jerad and me have been really fun and have let us really enjoy the natural relationship that we have as good friends for many years, working in this industry and trying to solve problems in it together for a long time. So some of the very friendly banter that happens and the humor in those episodes, which is very natural, accidental, the tangents, the kind of little laughs here and there is great fun for us, as well as we hear, at least for listeners as well. I did have somebody come to me the other day and say actually their favourite episodes were the ones with just the two of us, from a humour kind of and relaxation point of view. Somebody even suggested we try and compete to join the mindfulness charts. Nothing scary happens on our podcast. It's just two happy voices chatting away about the magical world of reinsurance.
I think the relationship between you and Jerad, that's been a major point of success for us, because you do have this natural rapport being friends. It's not like you've been forced into this role with someone that you don't know and there's weird tension. You come on and you're good to go. It's really great. And you start off with a tangent that has absolutely nothing to do with reinsurance, which is when I normally have to get my board out and be like, okay, we need to film an episode now.
Yeah. Those tangents are never planned as well. I don't know if they seem staged or not to somebody listening, but they are just literally, we think of something or something reminds us of something at the beginning of an episode. It's like, oh, I didn't tell you about this thing that happened last week.
Yeah. Oh, there's a plant on my table. You know, I had a plant subscription. Yeah. And then you talk for 5 minutes about planting.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the way it should be, I think.
That's good. Yeah. I do think that moving forward, I'd like you both to be on the road together when it's reinsurance on tour. Reinsurance on the road, actually. That's nice alliteration.
Oh, we can do something with that.
Yeah.
The road to reinsurance. The reinsurance on the road. Or reinsurance rolling. We could play with some ideas.
If we can get a Rolls Royce, or
it's going to become our version of carpool karaoke this way. But
yeah, if we can get both of you together, I think that's probably the best way. I know Jerad's planning on doing some travel to the US soon.
Yep.
So he might be doing some of these podcasts alone.
Yeah.
Or if not,
saving environmental damage. Yeah. Long fall flights for too many of us.
Well, he's going to
arguably the plane's going anyway, but let's not get down that rabbit hole.
So we're not taking the private jet?
Not until we've got one. No.
Okay, fine.
But yeah, no, I think that would be very exciting to have more episodes where we're around the world doing interesting things.
Do you have any topics in mind for what we haven't covered yet, which you would like to cover that isn't currently on our list?
So I've got a huge backlog of things that I want to get to. Again, we always have opportunity to speak with really interesting people, but from a topic point of view, it's usually not so much about the people, but about the topics they can help us to understand. So we talked about the space episode from a product and line of business perspective. There's still so much to uncover, all sorts of interesting niches. We haven't done anything on kidnap and ransom insurance and reinsurance. We haven't done anything really on marine or motor or aviation yet. There's a lot to be uncovered for our listeners still that could be, I think, very, very interesting from that side of things. Also, there's whole functions we haven't explored yet. We need to get somebody from a claims background on soon, I think, because reinsurance claims and loss adjusting and so on is a fascinating sub-industry in its own right. So a lot of people in that space that I think we'll be searching for a suitable guest for soon.
Do you want to contextualize that topic? Not for me, obviously, for the listeners.
Yeah, your decades of reinsurance experience coming to the forefront.
I just want to check that you know exactly what you're talking about.
We should explain. So Cordy is one of the rare members of the Supercede team who has come into the industry fresh and actually, unfortunately, came from a tech background before. So he's doubly disappointed when he sees the state of our industry. But yeah, so again, that to dive into that area briefly that we hopefully will talk about on a separate episode soon. Reinsurance claims, you're dealing not just with one individual policyholder claiming, you're dealing with an insurance company normally or some kind of entity that has lots of policies that are all triggering at once if it's a treaty. So how do you assess the damage of an earthquake, for example, when those happened in New Zealand, the Wellington earthquakes a number of years ago, in order to validate an insurer's claim that many of their policyholders are all claiming at once? And how do you do inspections of record? How do you do amount adjusting and so on? Because ultimately a lot of these insurance companies depend on their reinsurers' willingness to provide the capital to pay the claims. Similarly for hurricane losses and so on, the scale of these events is huge, and arguably, much like in insurance, it's a product where the cost of the goods sold isn't known until afterwards, but also the quality of the goods sold isn't known until afterwards. So it's only in the event of a claim that you actually find out how good your reinsurers are. So many reinsurers take great pride, not just in speed of settlement, but also in quality of service around the settlement process, which actually varies quite a bit between different reinsurers. Some it's a sort of black box that they have to submit claims into. Others it's incredibly hands-on and they've given you the money before you've even claimed because they know you're going to have a loss. Really, really interesting space to dive into if we get a chance sometime soon. and not to forget the broker's role in all of that as well.
For those not watching the video component of this podcast, another reason that the podcast actually works and why it's been successful is because Ben is a genuine reinsurance nerd. His eyes light up when he talks about loss adjustment, and I haven't seen that in any other person.
There we are. Not even Jerad.
I'll need to
Need to verify. We'll get out the video archive footage and see.
It's good. Normally when I'm over there and I'm like looking at you for time, but I actually have power to actually
stop
it now.
You could. Do you want to do the honors and wrap up the episode?
I'm getting drunk with power.
Yeah, maybe not then.
Don't want it to stop.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, we do need to because our wonderful videographer here in Munich can't stay here all day, although I'm sure he's loving all of the reinsurance information that's being thrown out. Yeah. He just blew out a kiss for those who can't see. Thank you, everyone, and we shall see you on another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast.
Dun, dun, dun. Thanks.